It's not that half of marriages end in divorce, it's that most are already dead, only no one dares to bury them. They sleep together, but live apart. They slide their fingers across a screen while the other breathes just centimeters away, like a ghost with a name. They share a house, a bed, a mortgage, but no longer share a gaze. They still say goodnight, but that phrase no longer means I love you, it means we're still pretending. Modern love has become a theater without an audience, a play repeated every day with the same actors, the same lines, and an ovation that never comes. Nietzsche warned of this more than a century ago when he called romantic love the most destructive lie of humanity. He said that man marries not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of being alone, fear of facing himself without a witness. And he was right, because there is no hell more silent than the one shared by two people who no longer desire each other, yet stay together only to avoid admitting that the desire is gone. Marriage doesn't die with shouting, it dies with silence. It dies when caresses turn into routine, when the kiss becomes procedure, when love becomes an obligation with an expiration date. And while everyone looks for someone to blame, no one dares to admit the most uncomfortable truth. The love that promised eternity was only a temporary chemical state, a fever we mistook for destiny. Romanticism turned it into religion, society turned it into a contract, but Nietzsche called it by its true name, a civilized form of madness. So before we talk about divorce, let's look directly at the real cause of death. It wasn't the lack of love, it was the death of mystery. Human beings cannot bear uncertainty, and that's why we invented romantic love, an idea as beautiful as it is functionally false. Nietzsche understood something with a clarity that now terrifies neuroscientists, that what we call eternal love is nothing more than a chemical storm with an expiration date. Dopamine, the narcotic of conquest, makes you believe you've found meaning in another person. Oxytocin binds you through tenderness, and serotonin gives you just enough calm to mistake pleasure for purpose. But these substances were never meant to last, only to ensure reproduction and the initial bond. After that, like any drug, the brain seeks balance, and the fire fades. What remains is not love, but emotional withdrawal, a biological hangover we disguise as routine. Nietzsche called it the will to power disguised as love, the desperate attempt of the human being to complete himself through another. We do not truly love the other, we use them to escape from ourselves. That's why, when the intensity fades, when there is no more mystery, the bond collapses, and what remains is a void so familiar that we mistake it for maturity. But the truth is far more brutal. We do not mature, we adapt. We domesticate ourselves to sustain the lie of stable love. Modern neuroscience confirms this. Helen Fisher of Rutgers University discovered that the phase of infatuation lasts between 18 and 24 months. After that, the brain reduces its production of dopamine, pleasure fades, and what was once a volcano of desire becomes barren ground. And that's where the tragedy begins, because we confuse chemistry with the soul. We believe silence is mature love, when in reality, it is emotional withdrawal. Marriage as an institution was built upon that biological self-deception. We ask a temporary state to sustain eternal promises, and when biology completes its cycle, as it always does, we call it failure. Nietzsche saw it long before anyone else. That's why he wrote that love is not a divine state, but a transitory madness. A perfect trap of nature that makes you believe you are choosing, when in reality, you are being chosen by your chemistry. And if you still believe what you feel is true love, wait until the storm passes. Because what survives desire is not always love. Sometimes it's only the fear of admitting that forever never existed. Falling in love is not a decision, it's a neurological hijacking. When someone attracts you, you are not choosing. Your brain deactivates the frontal lobe, the area responsible for rational judgment, and releases a storm of dopamine, norepinephrine, and phenylethylamine, the same chemicals that flood an addict's body during their first hit of heroin. That's why love isn't simply felt, it's endured. The heart races, the hands sweat, the mind never rests. Every message, every glance, every silence becomes a dopaminergic hit. You become intoxicated by the idea of the other. Nietzsche understood this long before brain scans existed. He called this state a necessary madness. Necessary because it ensures the survival of the species. Madness because it distorts reality to the point of turning an ordinary person into the center of your symbolic universe. Modern neuroscience calls it limerence, an obsessive state where the brain confuses dopamine with destiny. In that stage, the reward system becomes a slave to uncertainty. Love grows not through presence, but through doubt. That's why the other person's silence becomes more stimulating than their affection. The brain, like a gambler at a roulette table, is more aroused by the possibility of winning than by the certainty of having won. Romantic love feeds on that same tension, the desire for the unattainable. A 2005 study at Harvard University proved this. The more uncertain the emotional response of the other person, the greater the activation of the dopaminergic system. Ambiguity, that intoxicating mix of pleasure and anxiety, is the secret fuel of human desire. Nietzsche would have said it differently: we do not love the other person. We love the feeling of being alive that their presence gives us. That's why, when the other finally reciprocates completely, the chemical storm begins to fade. Dopamine drops, the obsession dies out, and what was once fire slowly turns into habit. Love stops being madness and becomes a contract. And that is where the agony begins, quietly, almost invisibly. Because the human mind is not designed for emotional balance, but for the endless pursuit of intensity. When that intensity fades, the relationship begins to die in the quietest way possible, through adaptation. The chemistry has fulfilled its purpose, the biological instinct has completed its cycle, and what remains is a choice we know how to sustain without dopamine, to love without the drug of infatuation. Nietzsche called it the test of the free soul, the moment you discover whether you are truly in love with the person or merely addicted to the feeling of needing them. Most people never notice when love dies. There's no explosion, no screaming, no blood on the floor, just a slow dimming, a kind of emotional erosion that begins when mystery disappears. It all starts with a single thought no one dares to say aloud: I'm not excited anymore. And though it seems insignificant, that thought marks the beginning of the end. Nietzsche warned it with brutal clarity. Love, when it promises eternity, is already lying. When the initial chemistry fades, the brain seeks new sources of stimulation. But most people try to revive the corpse of passion with the same poison that killed it: routine, dinners, anniversaries, empty promises, rituals designed not to feel, but to remember that they once felt. Love then becomes a museum, a place where memories that no longer live are put on display. Neuroscience confirms it. After the dopaminergic phase, the brain activates regions linked to habit and safety, replacing excitement with belonging. But desire does not understand safety. Desire feeds on risk, and when risk disappears, desire dies. That's why so many couples begin to look like two actors reciting lines from a script they no longer believe in. The man who was once fire now measures, calculates, moderates. The woman who was once a mystery now anticipates every word, and both, without realizing it, become diminished versions of themselves. Nietzsche called this the domestication of the will, the process by which two individuals, out of fear of losing the bond, renounce the very forces that once made them desire each other. He ceases to be free. She ceases to be an enigma. And together, they build the prison they call stability. Psychology calls it affective dissonance, continuing to play the role of a relationship when the emotion that sustained it no longer exists. On the outside, it looks like mature love. On the inside, it's a slow death disguised as loyalty. The body knows before the mind does. The skin no longer responds the same. The kiss no longer ignites anything. The other's voice becomes background noise. And still, they stay. Not out of desire, but out of fear. Fear of destroying the image they built. Fear of returning to solitude. Fear of admitting that what they had was never eternal, only chemical. Nietzsche would say it bluntly: marriage doesn't fail when love ends. It fails when habit begins. And here lies the cruelest paradox. The same love that was once a force of freedom becomes the machinery that manufactures your own servitude. You become a slave to the image of love, to what others believe happiness is, to the story you once wrote and now no longer know how to end. Thus, marriages do not die from infidelity or lack of love. They die from suffocation, from an excess of certainty, from the loss of that vertigo that once made the other a mystery instead of a routine. Passion is not destroyed by time. It is destroyed by the fear of losing what no longer exists. And when that happens, the bond ceases to be a union and becomes a contract, a cage with walls of courtesy where two souls continue performing love only to avoid facing the truth. That passion died the day they stopped being strangers. There comes a point when the soul grows tired of obeying, not the other person, but the lie it created to sustain the unsustainable. Modern marriage doesn't die when love ends, it dies when authenticity begins to ask for air. Nietzsche called it the revolt of the inner slave, the moment when the will, suffocated by years of concessions, decides to return to its natural state, free, unpredictable, dangerous. On the outside, it looks like a crisis. On the inside, it is resurrection. The man who repressed himself for years to maintain peace begins to see the emptiness of his own surrender. The woman who sacrificed her independence in the name of stability begins to feel a hatred she cannot explain. Because that hatred isn't toward her partner, but toward the domesticated version of herself. Modern psychology describes this as reactance, the biological impulse that awakens when we feel our freedom has been restricted. The mind, tired of obeying expectations, rebels, even if it means destroying what it once built. Nietzsche saw it long before anyone else. The soul that renounces its power becomes ill, and its illness is called morality. That's why the end of a marriage is rarely rational. It's explosive. Every reproach, every silence, every frustration disguised as love eventually sets fire to the field of the everyday. And what follows is not a breakup, it's liberation in the form of war. Psychologists at Stanford University confirmed this. Couples who repress themselves the most in the name of harmony are the ones most likely to experience violent explosions in the end, not out of malice, but out of saturation. The soul cannot tolerate eternal confinement. Nietzsche understood that every love that demands submission carries within it the seed of rebellion. Because the human being was not born to belong, he was born to expand. And when a relationship stops being a space for growth and becomes an altar of sacrifice, the will does what it always does when it feels imprisoned. It breaks. That's how the cruelest divorces are born, the separations that leave only ruins behind. It's not hatred that drives them, it's spiritual survival. Both try to kill, in the other, the weak version they created to please. And the most disturbing part is, they succeed. But in doing so, they also destroy themselves. Nietzsche would not have called it failure. He would have called it rebirth, because only the one who walks through the fire can find himself again, without masks. That's why when everything ends, what remains are not just emotional ruins, but a question suspended in the smoke. Was it love, or was it fear of being alone? And in that silence after the scream, when the papers are signed, when the bed is empty, when the echo of routine no longer weighs, something begins that is harder than loving, remembering who you were before you loved. Nietzsche summed it up in a phrase that still burns like hot steel. He who cannot live alone is not free. And perhaps that's why modern love fails so often, because most people are not looking for a partner, they're looking for a lifeline. And when the lifeline deflates, they discover they never learned how to swim. When love collapses, not everything is destroyed. What truly falls is the illusion, and beneath its rubble lies something far more valuable, the truth. Most people don't experience rebirth after divorce, they simply replace one dependency with another. But a few, those who can face the emptiness without anesthesia, discover what Nietzsche called the birth of the sovereign spirit. That moment when the individual stops seeking meaning in others and begins to create it from within. For years, your life revolved around us. Your happiness depended on their tone, your worth on their attention, your identity on their presence. But when all of that breaks, what remains is a mirror where a shared face used to be. And what you see there is not always pleasant. That's where the real work begins. Not healing, because healing is not forgetting, but rebuilding yourself without asking for permission. Nietzsche wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." And that why, after a divorce, can no longer be another person, it must be your own growth. Modern psychology confirms this. Studies on post-traumatic growth show that after the most painful breakups, those who take responsibility for their pain without seeking someone to blame develop higher levels of clarity, independence, and purpose. Destruction can be an act of creation, if you know which part of yourself you're willing to let die. Because divorce is not just the end of a bond, it's the end of the version of you that believed you needed someone else to exist. And that death, though painful, is the only doorway to real freedom. In this new stage, silence no longer frightens you. Solitude stops being punishment and becomes territory. It's no longer an absence that hurts, but a presence that brings order. The noise of the past fades, and for the first time, you hear your own voice. That's when you understand what Nietzsche meant by the Übermensch, the man who creates himself. Not the one who dominates others, but the one who masters his need to be loved in order to feel alive. Maturity is not about renouncing love. It's about loving without losing your sovereignty. Not giving yourself away to be complete, but sharing yourself without fragmenting. Don't seek refuge, seek a mirror. Authentic love doesn't bind, it amplifies. It doesn't demand eternal promises, only real presence. And if you ever love again, it won't be to fill a void, but to walk beside someone who has also learned to be alone without breaking. Because Nietzsche's final paradox is this: only the one who has lost everything can truly love. Because they no longer love to possess, they love because they've understood that nothing belongs to them. That's how the farce of dependent love ends, and something more dangerous and purer begins. The freedom to love without need. And now that you know this, you can never love the same again. Because you've understood that love is not sustained by permanence, but by freedom, that no one can complete you, and that everything you once called security was only fear disguised as tenderness. Nietzsche didn't destroy love, he purified it. He showed us that to love is not to merge with another, but to dare to be yourself before another, without hiding your shadow, without asking to be rescued. Divorce was never an ending, it was an initiation. The ritual where the version of you that loved from lack dies, and the being who can love from abundance is born. So if you're here, still standing among the warm ruins of a love that has burned out, do not see it as a loss. See it as the fire that revealed who you truly were beneath the decoration. Because true power is not preserving what leaves, it's not collapsing when it leaves. And when you reach that point, when you can look into the void and still stand tall, love stops being a prison and becomes a choice. If you wish to keep descending into this darkness, if you want to understand how desire, attachment, and solitude intertwine within the human soul, watch the other videos on this channel that appear on your screen. Each one is a doorway to the same truth. Only those who belong to themselves can love without fear. But before you go, ask yourself something brutal and honest. Who are you willing to lose, just to never lose yourself again?